All right, folks, welcome again to the Bring Your Own Ballots and Beverage. We're going to review the ballot measures that are on your, probably on your ballot, definitely California ones, and if you're in Oakland, the Oakland City measures as well. In the chat, I'll continue to post it. There's a ballot guide that you can download and use to keep track of how you want to vote personally. We'll talk about some of the endorsements, including the ones made by the PTSA. And there's also information in there about who's funding each of these measures. So look for that in the chat. And we're going to have each section, each ballot measure is going to be addressed by one person. And then there'll be someone in the chat collecting answers answering questions or collecting questions for later for our discussion time. We are going to try and get through these in about 10 minutes each. And then at the end, kind of have a free-for-all discussion, and then we'll switch over to the other non-education related ballot measures. So if that's not of interest to you, you can jump off. If it is, you can stick around. We are not going to discuss candidates. We're going to just talk about ballot measures, mostly because we would be here all night long, which for some of us political people, we would love that, but not everyone wants that. And so I would direct you, if other people have voting guides that they would like to reference, please put them in the chat. We did put some voter guides in our agenda, so you can see how some local groups have weighed in on the different measures. So with that introduction, I am going to turn it over to Jessica Gray, who is an Oakland Tech parent and one of the vice presidents on the PTSA for programs, and also is, I think, on the board of Equity Allies for OUSD. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And on what?
But yeah.
I'll let you describe it. And I'm going to turn it over, and then Star Leitner will be answering questions in the chat as we go along. So, all right, let's get started.
Star. All right, I'm just going to share my screen. Just give me 1 second. Can you reshare the agenda? I think someone just came in, Andrea. Okay. So I'm going to be talking about schools and communities first, otherwise known as Prop 15 on the November ballot, which the PTSA has wholeheartedly endorsed, the statewide PTSA. So we will definitely be talking about it in terms of yes on 15. So what does the prop do? So what does Prop 15 do? It closes property tax loopholes by requiring commercial and industrial property to be reassessed based on their actual fair market value. So this is opposed to the way that the system currently works, in which properties are assessed based on the year that the property was purchased, the value at the year that the property was purchased. So that could be 10 years, 20 years, or even 30 years. And in a lot of cases, especially with large companies like McDonald's, Chevron, Disney, those companies are paying based on their property value at from 1978. It also, very importantly, completely exempts homeowners, renters, and agricultural land. So this will not affect your property taxes on your home at all. It also exempts small businesses that are valued, whose property is valued at $3 million or under. It also cuts taxes for small businesses. So there is a new tax cut, which has been the first tax cut for small businesses in a generation. That is the equipment tax elimination, which in turn will reduce or eliminate the small business personal property tax for most small businesses. It also provides transparency and accountability. So baked into the measure, there are requirements for public disclosures of new revenues, both in the budgeting process and in records that need to be made public on a yearly basis. So there will be full transparency in terms of how the money is spent. Hold on. There we go. So how much will Prop 15 generate? So lots of nonpartisan research has been done that shows that it will bring in at least 12 billion every single year. 40% of which will be for schools, so K through 14 education, and 60% which will be for community services. So what does this mean locally? 600 million for Alameda County alone. What this means for our schools is over 36 million for Oakland schools and over 25 million a year for OUSD, which would definitely help with some of the budget crisis that we've had over the last couple of years. It'll also, in terms of school spending, the LCFF formula will be used to distribute the funds, so that they'll be using an equity formula so that the schools that need it the most will get a little bit more than schools that need it less. What's the money spent on? So like I said, local schools, teachers, computers, breakfast and lunch, the arts, the things that a lot of parents have to pay for now through PTAs. At the city level, housing and homelessness prevention, libraries, street repair, parks, the things that we think of when we think of our city spending. And at the county level, health services for fighting things like pandemics, which is very pertinent at the moment, community clinics, fire prevention is definitely a service that will be used with this money. So it's both at the local level, the city level, and the county level for each county. And then why do we care? Why should we care as parents? So since 1978, California spending, well, let's just put it this way. In 1978, California spending was ranked number 5 on per pupil spending. Today, we're ranked number 39. So you can see the difference in California from these other states in terms of how much money we spend per student at our schools. So we spend about half of what New York spends. Also since 1978, which is the year that Prop 13 was passed, the residential share of property taxes went from 55% to 72%. So residential property taxes have really been increasingly burdened with this revenue, and this sort of seeks to correct that. So it seeks to make sure that larger corporations are paying their fair share of this tax revenue. It also has come out that 92% of the revenue that would be spent, that would be generated would be only from 10% of businesses. So most of this revenue is coming from these businesses that have been here a very long time and that haven't been paying, you know, a market share property value tax. So it also levels the playing fields for businesses, both small and large, that are here or starting businesses now that have to pay taxes based on current value versus these businesses that have not had to pay. So those businesses right now are paying fair market value property tax, but they are competing with companies who are paying a much lower tax because they've been here a really long time. And then who supports this? So there's over 1,300 elected officials in the state of California who support this. Our own mayor, OUSD, I think every board member has said that they support it. The California State PTA, all the local PTAs, and certainly it has a lot of union support. So there's broad support across the state for this proposition to pass. And I think a lot of groups would like to see this money get channeled into their schools and communities. And then finally, we're almost at the finish line of working to get this passed, and there is a statewide day of action. So on Thursday, there's a statewide day of action where parents are being asked to take 15 minutes to do something for Prop 15. So if you are interested, I will put the Facebook event in the chat. And I'm happy to answer questions at the end. I will also put some links in the chat in terms of small business questions, because those are the questions that really come up the most with this proposition. So I'm gonna give some resources in the chat for that as well. And that's it.
That was amazing, Jessica. You did that in record time. That was a 7-minute presentation. So it's really the yes on 15. We feel comfortable. You know, as Jessica pointed out, there are questions from small business owners and they have answers for that. This actually affects a really small number of commercial landowners. And decreasingly so, because it used to be it would have caught more, and they actually revised the measure to make sure that it caught fewer. So thank you, Jessica. If you guys have questions about that, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will loop back. Otherwise, we're going to switch over to June Katchner, who's going to talk about Prop 16. So you got to go off mute.
Yes, every single day. Hi, everyone. My name is June Katchner. I have a daughter, Mitra, 11th grade. I'm glad everyone could be here today. I'm just going to switch to and share a screen. Let's see. Is that sharing?
Not yet.
Okay. Sorry. I may not know how to do this correctly. Hold on one second.
Just hit the share. You see the share?
Yeah. Yes, is that right?
You got it.
Okay. All right, so thank you everyone. So Prop 16, I want to go into present mode if I can. Yes. So Prop 16, going back, is an opportunity for Californians to take a step toward dismantling structural racism and sexism. I'm going to be pretty open about the fact that I'm coming in with a yes for Prop 16, and most of these slides come from that campaign, but I'm not actually with the campaign. So this is going to be a little more basic than Jessica's slide presentation. But what is Prop 16? So many of you, I'm sure, remember Prop 209, which banned affirmative action in California, which banning affirmative action at that time meant that the state could no longer consider race or gender in college admissions, along with contract and hiring decisions at state-run institutions. Prop 16 would, if we vote for Prop 16 in California, it would bring back affirmative action and once again allow diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions. It's important to note that there's no quotas here, so no gender or racial quotas would be used for hiring in college admissions, and that Prop 16 would be subject to strict oversight by California Department of Justice to ensure that it was implemented correctly and not allowing discrimination. So arguments in favor, many of you I'm sure are disheartened by all the racial disparities we are seeing in COVID-19 deaths, COVID-19 related deaths and unemployment, police violence against Black and Latino people that we're all seeing, demonstrating the existence of systemic racism and the lack of progress we are achieving on equality. California's current ban on affirmative action has hindered this ability of women and underrepresented minorities to get hired. With Prop 16, it's our chance to fight discrimination and give people of color equal opportunities. Race, ethnicity, and gender consciousness in admissions and hiring processes will promote equality and diverse learning and workspaces, which I think most people on this call want. And if you need any additional support for why we need affirmative action in California, it's still true, 80 cents is the amount white women in California are paid for every dollar paid to white men. This decreases for Black women to 61 cents and horribly to 42 cents for Latinas in California. 1.1 billion is the amount women-owned and people of color-owned businesses lose each year to government contracts. Another stat is that the amount of admission rations at UC campuses have dropped by 26% for Latino and Black students since we banned affirmative action in 1996. As Jessica was pointing out for Prop 15, we also have broad support for Prop 16. A lot of progressive individuals and groups, ACLU, California Democratic Party, California Teachers Association, University of California Student Association, a lot of our representatives, Gavin Newsom, Nancy Pelosi, Barbara Lee, support from Chinese for Affirmative Action, and executive director from Pacific Policy and Planning Council. Sorry, I'm having trouble reading my screen at the same time. But a lot of broad support. I will say there is some controversy about it, and I welcome you to look at neutral sources as well if you have questions about the controversy. I know KQED has a really good source that provides both sides. I also can answer questions as well. And I also put in a link here to the Yes proposition, Yes campaign. But essentially, this is giving us an opportunity to overturn Prop 209, allow for affirmative action, which is already happening in many businesses and nonprofits, but it would allow for affirmative action for education and state contracts hiring. So that's essentially it. Thank you so much.
Awesome, June. Thank you so much. When you stop sharing, do you mind putting those links in the chat for folks so they can click on those?
Yep, I can do that.
Great. Awesome. Again, if folks have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we will come back on having a discussion about any of these if folks have additional questions or information they'd like to share. I'm really psyched to have Oakland first student Barrett Valentine is up next, and hopefully I didn't lose her. Are you there, Barrett? Go off mute and say hello so we can see you. Did I lose her?
I'm sorry, was that me? My Wi-Fi just crashed.
Oh no.
I'm so sorry.
No, we can still
I'm here now. I'm gonna turn my camera off though. I find that sometimes makes my Wi-Fi work better.
Okay. So let me just do a quick, Barrett's actually going to speak on two things, Proposition 18, and she probably is more intimately involved with Measure QQ. And those both involve youth enfranchisement stuff. So Barrett, go ahead. You have the floor.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone. So I'm Barrett Valentine. I am 17 years old and I'm a senior. I'm here to talk about Measure QQ, which is otherwise known as Oakland Youth Vote, and that's going to be on the ballot in November. It's unique among youth-related legislation because it's actually been created and championed by youth and young people. And if it passes, 16 and 17-year-olds will be able to vote in Oakland school board elections, which I feel remedies a pretty fundamental failure in our democracy. I will clarify this. I am here with the Measure QQ campaign. I am very pro, but I also think that it's a pretty simple concept. It's letting 16 and 17-year-olds vote in school board elections. So I'm mostly going to talk about why I support it and why I think all of you should. So representative democracy is inherently the few leading the many. The only thing that keeps this system fair is the fact that our representatives are supposed to be just that, representative of the people they lead. Right now, it's kind of impossible for the school board to do this because the people that they serve are locked out of the democratic process. The school board serves all of Oakland, that's totally true, but their first obligation should always be to the students. And while there are a lot of school board members who work really hard to keep their obligation to students and represent us as accurately as possible, the fact is, if they didn't, we would have no real recourse. There's no actual accountability. We can't vote the people who represent us in, and we can't vote the people who don't represent us out. Passing Measure QQ would pretty much force school members to fulfill what I view as their duty of accountability to youth. Passing Measure QQ obviously wouldn't fix all of the problems that OUSD faces, but it brings a new voice to the table, and it's a voice that I think is pretty important. Adults, I mean, you all mean very, very well, but frankly, you're not in high school right now. And in high school, things are just bigger. The choices that we make and the opportunities that we get from an outside perspective can just seem like a little thing, but in reality, they can affect our entire adult lives. Programs that may, if an adult participated in them, would only affect their current happiness or well-being. For us, it can determine whether we graduate, whether we go to college, whether we go into the field we want. These are very, very big deals when you're in high school. And when we grow up, we get bigger responsibilities. That's just kind of how it works. And once you get a job and a life that's way bigger than high school, it's really, really easy to forget how big things feel when you're in high school and how important they are. So that's kind of why it's so important that youth voice is there to remind them. The problem is that our school board representatives, the people who make decisions about all of our educations and by extension, all of our futures, are chosen by adults who a lot of the time haven't even set foot in a high school in years. So I believe that to truly make OUSD the really best place it can be for students, this perspective has to be included. So as well as remedying what I think is a fundamental failure in democracy, it brings new voice and bringing new voices to the table. Measure QQ would create a generation of informed lifelong voters. So studies have shown that political knowledge of the average 16-year-old is no different from that of a college student. College students can vote in every single election. And introducing the civic process to youth makes them more likely to vote for the rest of their lives. They found even that if you introduce the civic process to a 16-year-old, they're more likely to be a lifelong voter than an 18-year-old, just because when we're 16, we live at home and our lives are more stable. So it's the perfect time to introduce a new element into our lives. The majority of Oakland students also live in districts that are most often represented or underrepresented in our government. So districts 5, 6, and 7 have the bulk of Oakland students, and allowing them to vote would push it would make our government a lot more representative of the entire population of Oakland. It also gives students the opportunity to learn about politics on a smaller scale before we have to vote on all of the huge elections that happen, that we have access to when we're 18. And it helps us to be more informed. In school board election, obviously party does play a role, but party politics isn't so strict. You get to actually take a look at the candidates and the issues, and in that way you can kind of learn how to go about politics in a way outside of just voting with the party and what you are supposed to vote for. So it prepares students and it gives them a skill set to make them really informed and engaged voters. So in this way, passing Measure QQ, it's obviously super beneficial to youth in Oakland and to the Oakland school system, but it's also beneficial to everyone in Oakland and honestly, everybody in this country, because every single person in this country who is affected by the government benefits from having more informed and engaged voters, which Measure QQ would create. Measure QQ is about honoring youth voice as well as all of that. And this is just a moral position for me. It's a voice that's really often discounted. It's a voice that I think deserves to be heard. We're not children anymore. We have jobs, we pay taxes, we go to school, we are applying to colleges. We are not little kids. We have worked so hard on this campaign and on so many other pieces of legislation, pieces of activism, movements, and our voices are often discounted just because of some preconceived notion that we don't really know what we're talking about or we don't really care. But the fact is, this is our own educations. We really know and we really care. And so in passing QQ, you not only create concrete effects that are good for Oakland, but you also honor the hundreds of young people in our city who work so hard to make this city and the world a better place and are often discounted for it. That's why it's so important to me and to so many other young people that Measure QQ was passed, because it's not only good for us, but it honors our voice. So I'm also here to briefly talk about Prop 18. And I have not worked on Prop 18, but it is the state ballot measure that is also going to be up for vote in November. If passed, it would allow 17-year-olds who are going to be 18 by the general election to vote in primaries and special elections before their 18th birthday. So basically, if you're going to be able to vote in November, but you don't turn 18 until, say, August, you can vote for your primary in the spring. I think that this is pretty important because it deals with the same failure of democracy as Measure QQ does. It means that 17-year-olds have pretty much no say in their choices for the general elections. And so while in the general, you get to choose between two people, you don't get to choose who those two people are. So it's the same thing. It's working to remedy a hole in our democracy where we kind of forgotten about representation. So yeah, yes on QQ and yes on 18. I can answer any questions in the chat if you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barrett. That was awesome. That was super informative. Great job. You've got a lot of big fans now. So one quick question is, do you know, have they described how it would logistically work? Like student or 16 and 17-year-olds would get a ballot with just their school board district member election on it? Is that how it would work?
I believe so.
Okay. That's great. I mean, while you were talking, I was thinking about the march that happened. It started at Oakland Tech, and it was led by students, and it was like the most phenomenal, biggest march we had. And you're right, the idea that all the kids in that march don't get a voice in their leadership is it's ridiculous. It's astounding. And so thank you so much for that great presentation and kind of bringing this issue up to us. We really appreciate it. Well, do anyone have any other questions? Because we are ahead of schedule. Amazingly, I've never been in a meeting that was ahead of schedule, like ever. Maybe that's because I worked at Kaiser. So I don't know, nothing was ever ahead of schedule. And so we don't have our next speaker. So I want to just pause here for a moment and just see if anyone wants to comment on 15, 16, 18, or Measure QQ. Okay, here's a question. Barrett, I don't know if you're still there. Curious about this. Do you think if it's good for high school students, it should be available in elementary and middle school?
No. I think that, like, I've talked about this a lot. I think that 18 is obviously an arbitrary age for voting. It's just something that we've picked because there needs to be a cutoff somewhere. But as someone who has very recently been 16 and very recently been 14, there's a huge difference. And I know, you know, based on being around people, that you learn a lot in those 2 years. And studies have shown that the average knowledge of a 16-year-old is pretty similar to that of a college student. That is not the case for middle schoolers or even younger high schoolers. So, I mean, I think that middle schoolers and elementary schoolers should absolutely have a voice in the process, and we should be encouraging people or kids from a super young age to voice their opinions to the various authorities, but maybe not vote quite yet.
Okay, fair. So the person who posted it was, why don't you, Katie, why don't you unmute and ask the question?
Hi, sure, okay. Yeah, sorry. What I was really trying to get at is that since the board, what do you call them? The board members would be making decisions not just for high schools, but for all schools, lower grades as well. If we include just a population of high school students who can vote for board members, do we think that is going to also be like whatever's good for the high schools, is that also going to be in the interest of lower grades? So well, as a parent, you know, I have kids in middle school and elementary school, and I think that it would be really fun for them to vote in high school when they get to be the right age. But I just want to make sure that, you know, I think as a parent, I have more than myself in mind when I'm voting. So I'm just wondering if, as you know, as a high school student, do you feel like, you know, what's good for you guys would also be good for all students at Oakland?
I mean, I think yes. I think that voting for candidates who prioritize student voice will be candidates who prioritize all student voice, not necessarily just high schoolers. I can't say specifically who or what type of candidates high schoolers are going to vote for, but I can say that we have, you know, relatively fresh experience with our middle and elementary schools as well. And we were just there, so we obviously care about the people there. Those are our siblings. We were just them. So we would be voting in our own interests, but in the same way as like a parent, we would be voting in the interests of everyone.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, do folks have any questions for Jessica or for June or for Barrett? You guys are a contemplative crew. I'm
The
gonna-
only thing, the only thing that comes to mind, and this is maybe not unique to Oakland props and the specific ones, is I've heard people just critique the idea of props and measures being a way to change policy or change things. I was just wondering if anyone wants to comment on that.
I'll say that I think it's not a great idea, you know, in a lot of ways for our democracy to basically be driven by initiatives, which at this point people can buy. And I think that having, you know, who's for and against things gives you a really good idea of how much money is being spent on these. At the same time, that's the situation that we have in California. So the best idea is to read, make sure you really understand, you know, exactly what each of these propositions is doing, you know, and just be as informed and educated as you can.
Does anyone love the proposition system and want to defend it?
I mean, obviously I can't vote, but I will say this. I like the idea of props and measures as a form of direct democracy. I talked about this a little bit earlier, how representative democracy is like, we choose these people, but it is a few people making decisions for everyone. So I think that it's kind of nice for occasionally for actually everybody to get to weigh in on an issue in an official way.
I feel a little bit torn because I definitely see that perspective. I also feel like with the volume of propositions that we have, that people can't really, it's very hard to take the time to educate yourself on the details of every one of these. And to me, the point of having accountable legislators is that they are the ones who have learned this stuff, digested it, and considered whether it's good for their constituents. Optimally, that's what the system should have, is they're the ones who get immersed in the details and help figure it out and make compromises around it. And we don't have to, for example, try and decide whether to regulate dialysis, which I think a lot of us feel low information about. So, yeah, it's a hard question. Well, thank you, Barrett. That was awesome. You were great, and you are welcome to stick around and listen if you like, but don't feel the need to do so. You can hop on or hop off according to your wishes. Really appreciate you being here. Great job.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for having me. I have college applications due in 2 days, so I am going to hop off, but
All right.
I had a great time, and thank you all for listening to me.
Great. Take care. Everyone's clapping for you. See ya. Okay, so our next proposition, which is perfect timing, District 1 school board member Jody London is going to do a presentation on Measure Y, and that's our last education related measure. And so we'll get through that. Jody, we figure maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and if there's questions, we can answer those. And it looks like you're sharing, and so you should go ahead. Make sure you're off mute.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Can I
Yep.
get a nod? Great. Thank you so much for inviting me here tonight. I always like to get to every PTA in the fall, and this is the way I was able to do it this year. So on your ballot, you're going to see Measure Y. It's a excuse me, when I first started working on school issues, it was in 2006, which met with Measure B. My older daughter was in like first grade or kindergarten, I don't remember, and it was a $375 million bond. So now we're at 735. This is a $735 million bond to update our school facilities. It needs 55% to win. You can see here some of the types of projects that we will be taking on district-wide if Measure Y is successful. Why do we need to renew our bond? So we earlier this year updated our facilities master plan. It shows that we have over $3 billion with a B in need. That is not unusual. If you look at the UC Berkeley Center for Cities and Schools, you will see that schools across the state and indeed across the country have similar underfunded needs in school facilities. We, as I mentioned earlier, we had Measure B in 2006, in 2012, Measure J. We just sold the last tranche of those funds. And there's no other source of school funding. The state put a bond on in March and it failed on the primary. And the federal government hasn't done anything yet about fixing schools. It could do that as part of COVID relief. If it does, we're going to need to have some matching funds ready to go, and the bond would also provide that. So we've had over 2 years of planning for this bond. We've looked at all of our schools. We've had a lot of school input. Some of you may have come to meetings I hosted earlier this year before COVID shut down at Claremont and also at Hillcrest. We had some meetings. It ranks all of our different priorities. And it looks also at projects that were not completed with the last bond. And I'll share the link to the deck so you all can look at this yourself if you want. It also identifies in the ballot, or in the measure, we identified a number of specific projects that we want to do. So these are some of those projects I know that Tech draws from beyond North Oakland, but in North Oakland, the 3 projects that have been prioritized are to build a new kitchen, cafeteria, and multipurpose room for Claremont Middle School. It's been several years since the fire and that needs to happen, as well as update the kitchens at Piedmont Avenue and Hillcrest Elementary so that they can participate in the school lunch program that's ready to roll as soon as we can have kids back in our school. So you can see the projects are all over the city where there's specific sites. These are some of the messages that we tested. We went out and polled voters in May as well as last fall because we wanted to make sure that we still had support for the bond. And we do. We're pretty confident that we can get 55%, but we don't want to take anything for granted. So I'll pop into the chat when I'm done talking my address. You can come by and pick up a yard sign, or I'm happy to bring you one if you let me know. So this is, and why do we need Measure Y? The language here is straight from the bond argument. The thing I want to call out for you here is that this bonds can only be used for buildings. We can't use bonds for salaries, for programmatic stuff. I mean, we can support the people who are administering the bond program, but we can't pay Principal Fairley's salary with this, or I saw Miss Arnaldi is on the call, or the superintendent. So, and we also have a very robust oversight committee. We actually recently strengthened their responsibilities. So we have oversight. Who's supporting it? The school board, the League of Women Voters, Faith in Action, the firefighters, the Trust for Public Land, who's been an amazing partner for us in helping build more green schoolyards, as well as several electeds and unions and many more. This is a little bit dated actually. And I just want to take a couple of minutes to show you some of the projects that we've done with Measure J. This is a picture, and this is an actual picture of the new central kitchen at 29th and West. In the foreground, you see what will become a 1-acre educational farm. So in this new central kitchen, we're able to prep all of the ingredients for school lunches and send them back to kids, send them out to school sites, the ingredients where they're going to be cooked and served hot on a plate, a nutritious lunch that smells good, that, it's just a great opportunity. It also has this 1-acre farm. This is kind of what the building looks like inside some of the kitchen space. You can see here one of the 2 classrooms that gives out onto the garden. Some more features. They actually have ovens that you roll the trays in because the ovens are so big. The next project I want to talk about that we've done with Measure J is Fremont High School out in the Fruitvale. This is an aerial view of it. Where did it go? Come back. And this is a new classroom building. I should say that all of our buildings, all of the construction we do meets the green guidelines of the Collaborative for High Performance Schools, which is like LEED for schools. So this is Fremont. You can see the new classroom building. It's much further along now. Fremont has never had a regulation size football field. It now does, with bleachers that can seat 2,000 people. I remember when the parents used to come down and complain they had nowhere to watch their kids play football. A new gym with a wellness center associated with it. We have 16 school-based health clinics in Oakland, and the bond helps us maintain them and build them. I next want to show you Glenview Elementary. We just had the press conference to introduce Glenview last week. This is the original facade, and everything else is new because the school was seismically unsound. So we replaced a whole lot of stuff, including some really old nasty portables. Any of you who had children who went to Chabot know what it's like to replace really old portables. That's what got me involved in this. Portables that dated from the 1940s. So here you can see some of those great features: natural daylight, courtyards, open space. It's very playful. It was so fun to go to Glenview the other day. You can see we've got modular furniture. This was all planned before COVID, and now it's going to be really great when we can go back into classrooms. The final project I want to share with you is Madison Park out in East Oakland, way out in the Sobrani Park neighborhood off 98th Avenue. We expanded Madison Park from being a middle school to being a 6 through 12, and we needed a high school building. And so this is the building. The principal actually had the vision for it and was able to work over many, many years to realize the vision. We were here a few weeks ago as well. You can see here that classroom with the daylight, the modular furniture. They have beautiful labs there, and great bike racks at every project. So that is Madison Park. Oh, what can you do to help? You can donate to the campaign. If you want to volunteer and do some phone calling, we can set that up for you. If you want to endorse, I don't think this is an endorsement meeting, so I don't know if the PTSA can endorse here. And certainly if you need a yard sign, I can set you up with one. So that's what I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jody. I really appreciate it. So one of the parents put a question in the chat asking, obviously it makes sense to fund schools, and how does the bond work, and whether there was concerns about that the Green Party folks or Green folks were opposing the bond. Can you speak to any of that?
I see that Sam has put into the chat that they actually have endorsed MeasureWise. So I don't know. I didn't know about their opposition. The only opposition, organized opposition I've seen is from the Alameda County Taxpayers Association. So they usually oppose things like this, and they did. Actually, our bond oversight committee supports this as well, right? And if we would have gone out a couple of years ago when some of the board members wanted to, I don't think the bond committee would have supported us, but we've really cleaned up the bond program and the way we're doing all that work, and they feel confident that we can move forward. And the need is so great. You know, it's $3 billion in need. You guys, your kids go to tech. I read everything on the Google group or whatever it's called now about the bathrooms and this and that. And so this would give us some funding to be able to address some of that, but not all of it, because the need is so immense here and elsewhere. Why are we funding additional buildings which may not be needed? So the projects that you saw listed are not, these are all upgrades. We're not building new schools. We are refurbishing existing schools. So Roosevelt, Garfield, Skyline, they all have, they're in different states of disrepair, but they need to be upgraded. They are not, some of them, they have seismic issues. Some of them have plumbing issues, lighting issues. You know, schools in Oakland are old, right? Like we've had schools in Oakland since the 1860s. Every time we've been able to build new schools, it's because there was a bond. I've gone through and looked at the records, and you can find articles from the 1920s talking about the great way Oakland is building schools. And every time they say there was a bond in 1911, and that's why Oakland built schools in 1913. So I don't know if that answers your question completely, but you know, we're still going to need the facilities, and we own the buildings. We're not even going to be able, like we have some properties now that we want to sell, and they're not, like, we're probably gonna have to tear them down in order to even get the property to a point where anyone would purchase it, you know, for something.
So Jody, on a related question, someone asked, how is the school list project developed? Can you speak a little bit about that process?
So yeah, I could pull it. I'll send you the deck. So we developed our facilities master plan. It included a facilities condition index, which looks at It went through in very excruciating detail, and you can look this up on the district's website, the facilities master plan, and it has a school by school list of what's needed at each school and estimates, because we don't know for certain until we actually go in there and start to do the work exactly what's needed of what we anticipate the costs will be. And then they were ranked. We had a number of criteria that we used to rank the different projects and different ways of looking at it. And then we had a school board meeting at the end of June, on June 29th, where we went through the list and we went back and forth and we prioritized, and we made sure that there were projects in every district, that there were that we were serving all of the neighborhoods, that we were meeting all of the different needs. There are some projects that have been put on hold for a long time, like Roosevelt and Garfield, and Claremont certainly is one that replacing that cafeteria that burned at Claremont is one that's been on hold for a long time. So some of the projects on that list are very high number projects, and some of them are much smaller. But there's a range, and then there's also about $200 million that's just kind of held back so that we can do those sort of district-wide things that we know need to happen everywhere, like plumbing and other things, lighting, and green schoolyards falls into that district-wide category as well.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions about Measure Y?
Can I ask sort of a general question? If Prop 15 passes, and I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of the meeting, so maybe this was touched on, but would it help with some of these types of projects, the funds from that, or is that totally going to be a separate fund of money?
So the bond money can only be used for school facilities projects. We do have the option of taking general fund money and using it for facilities, and that's where the Prop 15 money would come in, would be, I think, through the general fund, but their need is so great elsewhere that we don't want to do that usually. I mean, if enough people in the community came out and said, hey, why don't you spend all your general fund money on your buildings, maybe the board would do that, but I don't think that is likely to happen.
Okay, thank you.
It's also only 25 million. It's projected 25 million a year for OUSD, so it wouldn't be nearly enough to sort of see the scope of these projects.
So Jody, another question that came into the chat, what specifically were some of the oversight changes that were implemented? The projects are great, nice, but they were the result of $1 billion in funds between Measure B and J. So whether there's new oversight on the new bond.
The oversight committee now has more authority they're going to be reviewing more proposed, if there are going to be changes in the project list or similar modifications, it goes to the bond committee first. They are involved, they have more involvement in, for example, right now we're filling, we're doing the tail end, I believe, of a search for a permanent deputy chief of facilities, and someone from the bond committee has been part of that. So we gave them additional authority to oversee what's happening. They've also put in place new reporting processes. There's actually going to be a meeting of the facilities committee on Friday, and the agenda includes a report on items that have been called out in audits previously and what the staff is doing to address those. So that's the facilities committee of the board that's meeting Friday morning. You can find the agenda on the district website.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions on?
And I see Jenny is asking about Jenny, this is a lot of the controls that I was just talking about to make sure that we avoid the issues that we had at Glenview. Some of the issues at Glenview were also because the neighborhood, the Oakland Heritage Alliance rather, started claiming that it was architecturally significant. And so we had to back up for quite a while and work through that, which we did. And so we kept that facade, which was the part that had the historic significance.
I have a question about something that I saw on the facilities list, which was an administration building.
Right.
Kind of
So the district's administration building at 1025 2nd Avenue flooded early in the 2013 year. We have been in rental space at 1000 Broadway for many years. and we need to have, I mean, we're paying quite a bit of money in rent there, and we don't want to be paying that money in rent. So we are, the board has directed the superintendent to proceed with refurbishing the Cole site, which has not been used as a school site in many years. It was actually closed when we were in state administration, to become that place where the central administration can be parked. So that's what that money is for. I believe it's capped at 40 million.
I saw something that said 50 million and it looked like it was a new administration building. So is that incorrect?
Well, I mean, they may be referring to the site. I mean, they may need to do some construction that turns it into a new administration building, but it's already designated for Cole. That was a decision that was the Cole site in West Oakland. That's a decision that was made last year. And I may have had the number wrong, Star. I apologize. I should have gone back and read it before this meeting. I've been jumping around all day.
Does anyone else have any questions on Measure Y, on Prop 15 or 16?
I just have one question about the facility list and the Cole building. Is this a done deal in terms of the project list if voters vote yes on on this measure, or is this list going to be revisited at any time, particularly the building, the administration?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Once if the bond is passed, then the board will have to approve an actual expenditure plan. So the list is the one that we assume the board would work off, but boards can make decisions. So, there could be some room there. I would just say there was a lot of pressure on us to, part of the reason we're at the point we're at is that there was not agreement in the community or among the board for all these many years about whether to rebuild at 1025 Second Avenue, what that should look like, whether there would be additional uses that we could realize there. It's just been a real hard one to solve. There hasn't been a consensus among the board or among the community. And finally, we pushed through because we could see that these rent expenditures were getting out of not something we wanted to maintain, but we had to make a decision. And if you're interested, I can point you to the documentation on how we landed on the decision that we did make.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. I'll stay online and look for that while I am.
Okay, and please feel free to put up some of the other references you made into the chat. I appreciate that. And I'm also going to just reshare the agenda for folks who may have come late. You can ignore it. I didn't change it. And thank you so much, Jody. We really appreciate the presentation. That was really helpful and informative. Folks, note if you're interested in supporting Measure Y, you can get a sign from Jody and from the Measure Y committee. With respect to the question about endorsement, because it's so soon before the election, it's hard for us to get endorsements before the general membership in time. So at this point, that's why we opted to do sort of an informational approach in hopes that everyone would kind of get a sense of what is most beneficial for kids based on your own judgment. So, okay. So it sounds like there's not any, there's some private endorsements going into the chat, and I'm not going to stop anybody from saying how you feel, but I'm going to switch over to my speed round. And for those of you who wonder how I can talk for an hour, it's because I'm a lawyer and I'm really just good at talking. I noticed there's a participant on here, Lisa Fuller. I hope you're still here. Lisa actually hosted a ballot measure party the other day that I was able to sit in on. And so some of this information that I got from the presentations that were in that meeting. And so I want to thank Lisa, and I encourage you, if you like this format, to host among your friends, because I find it's a great way to get information out. Final plug before I start yammering about the other props. Today, I said this at the beginning. Today, or the other day, I did my ballot and I dropped it off yesterday at the post office. But because it was a federal holiday, the box was full and I jammed it in there and then I couldn't get it to open or close again. And so I spent a lot of time yesterday worrying about whether my ballot was going to get stolen out of the box. The Secretary of State's office lets you sign up to track your ballot. And the Alameda County Registrar of Voters will text you or email you when they have received your ballot or noticed that your ballot is en route. So I got a text message today that said the post office had let the Registrar of Voters know that my ballot was on the way and they would let me know when it had been accepted. If my ballot's not accepted, they'll also, I believe, tell me and I can go and cure it. So if my signature doesn't match, or I don't think there's signature matching in California, but they'll tell me like, oh, you didn't sign it, you didn't seal it. So you can cure your ballot up to a certain point. The value of that is once your ballot's accepted and approved, it will be counted beginning at 7 a.m. on November 3rd. So your vote will be tallied in that first launch of reporting at when the polls close, which is exciting and will be really, what we're really all waiting for. So here I go. I encourage everyone to look at the agenda. There's also other information coming into the chat. Please feel free. I'll keep it open so you can see. The first prop I'm going to talk about is, and the other thing I'll say is, if you have information about this stuff, please pop up and tell me I'm wrong, I'm stupid, you should know this, whatever. And then also, in 5 minutes, you guys all wave me down and tell me to shut up and I'll move on to the next one. Okay. Proposition 14 authorizes bonds to continue stem cell research. Now, this would authorize $5.5 billion in state bonds to fund a specific research institute for stem cell that was created in the late 2000s when there was no federal funding for stem cell research. And so we created our own institute in California. The positive parts of this are that we have an independent source of stem cell research investment, and it's not funded directly through the taxpayers, but it's paid through a bond. The way that bonds work is that they sell the bonds on the bond market, and then we have to pay back with interest. So it will have an additional cost, about $260 million per year over the next 30 years to pay this back. So my inclination is I'm pro stem cell research. I think it's a great thing. Some folks have pointed out that when the original bond measure passed, their understanding was that this would be a self-funding and that there is now federal funding for stem cell research, thus depriving the Research Institute of the original need, which was that there was no federal funding available. So, but there's lots of reasons. There's a lot of, I mean, right now you're already hearing about it. I mean, this Regeneron is the product of stem cell research. And it is obviously, I can't speak to the science of it, but it's obviously worth looking at whether there are effective therapies being developed across the board for such things as viruses, as well as genetic congenital conditions that people are born with. And so, yeah, that's Prop 14 in a nutshell. Did I miss anything? Doesn't sound like it. Okay, I'm going to move on to Prop 17. Prop 17 restores the right to vote to people who have completed their prison sentences who were not eligible to vote while they were in prison, specifically felons. So when felons complete their prison term, while they're on parole, they're able to restore their voting rights. This is, something that, I don't know if people think a lot about whether people in prison should or shouldn't have voting rights. Obviously, this has been a very big issue with Florida, having a lot of controversy over the reenfranchisement of people who finished their prison terms. The Republicans in Florida really narrowed the state. They had a ballot measure that did give enfranchisement, and they have tried to narrow that. LeBron James and Michael Bloomberg are trying to reverse that by paying off the fines of felons. This would kind of eliminate that issue here. People would be eligible to vote when they finish their prison term. They don't have to complete parole. Parole terms in California can last from 1 year to 10 years. So it's a long time that people might not be eligible to vote, and it is depriving lots of communities of a voice in their who's elected. I guess the disadvantaged people, the people who would be no on this, say people who've been in prison shouldn't vote. You be the judge. Anyone have any additions, subtractions, comments, questions? I'm counting to the beat of 5 so that people.
I personally work with a lot of people who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. A bill like this would affect people of color and communities of color in a positive way, in an enormous positive way. It's very much an issue in communities, that, particularly in the Bay Area, but even statewide, communities of color where there's just it's no secret, it's been a disproportionate impact. Our criminal justice system disproportionately impacts those folks and their families, and this is just one small step. I mean, we used to have it where if you had been convicted of a felony, you could never get your right to vote back. Now, folks who have felonies can petition to have their voting rights restored, and this is kind of another step in that direction. So on a very personal level, I urge a yes vote. It doesn't really hurt to give people the right to vote, that I've noticed. So that's my spiel.
Thank you. Great. Anyone else have anything they want to add on 17? No? Okay. We're going to start to get into the slightly more arcane measures here. Prop 19. Okay, this is also sort of a modification of the old Prop 13, which is the original lock in your property tax rule that would allow homeowners who are over 55, disabled, or wildfire disaster victims to transfer their primary residence's tax base to a new residence, to a replacement residence. It changes the taxation of family property transfers, so people who inherit property from their parents, and it establishes a fire protection fund. The idea behind this is that it would free up lots of housing that is currently occupied by, I'll take my street as an example. There's a number of people on my street who are older folks, older than the age of 55, and they stay in their house that may be a 4-bedroom house for 30 years after their family leaves because their tax base is so low. This would allow them to transfer it to another residence and free up that residence to kind of have more turnover in the housing stock. I don't know whether that's actually proven, and probably someone who works with this stuff might know, because there's actually already an agreement among 7 counties in California that allow this to happen already. So people can move, say, from Alameda County to Santa Clara County and carry their tax base. They have an agreement within those 7 counties to do that. This would expand this to the whole state. The proponents of this believe that local governments would gain tens of millions of dollars in property tax revenue. It also means that people inheriting property are no longer able to inherit the property tax rate of the original owner, which is also kind of locks up properties.
The inheritance thing, if you live in the property, you could do it. Right now, if you inherit a property, you can rent it out. You could inherit 10 properties and rent them all out and get the low basis. This would still let you inherit one and live in it, but not rent it out.
Got it. Helpful. Thank you. So all the other 9 properties would be freed up to the current tax rate. Is that right? At the new level. Okay, perfect. So that is the background as I understand it on Prop 19. I don't know what the political background of it is.
What if someone, so it's, I just want to make sure I understand. So basically it's saying you can inherit the property and keep the tax rate if you decide to live in it. But if you rent it at all, including short-term rental, long-term rental, all rentals, then you have to pay the regular tax rate. Is that correct?
I'm not sure about exactly the technicalities, but right now, if you inherit a property, you can get the basis transferred to you, but you would have to say you're a permanent resident there. I don't know if there's any loopholes there.
I see.
Yeah. So does anyone else have any other information about this? Some people think it's not going to have a big difference, that there's not actually a lot of people who are older than 55 who are camping out in.
There was a really good article today, Sunday, in the San Francisco Chronicle by Kathleen Pender. It's all about Prop 19. And I thought I hated it because just for all the reasons that I might. And after I read it, I'm open, like I need to do more research. And I wanted to say that if any of you know, I don't know how many of you are familiar with calmatters.org, but they're a great news source, and they have 1-minute videos about every one of these propositions. I haven't watched the one yet on Prop 19, but I would look at that article from Sunday's Chronicle in the business section and Cal Matters and whatever else you can find, because I'm still kind of on the fence about it.
Great, thank you.
I wouldn't say that I know, I'm not actually sure how I'm going to go on this, but I'm inclined to be opposed to it because it just perpetuates all of what I don't like about Prop 13, which is, enshrining a particular tax base from 19 whenever. And it means that it's very inequitable between neighbors. The newcomers are paying huge taxes and people who have owned their property for a long time aren't. I would support this if it was limited to fire victims and disabled people, but I don't think that just because you're over 55, you should be able to, transfer this anywhere. I think that just perpetuates something inequitable.
I think that the idea is that people who might be retired but are staying in homes could downsize, freeing up more actual housing, helping to alleviate the housing crisis. Because I think the argument is that they're like trapped in these homes because they can't afford to go anywhere else and pay the current tax rate. They might not have an income exactly anymore. So I agree. I'm not pushing one way or the other. I just think that's the argument for it.
I know that's the argument, and I'm just not sure. I'm not sure. I think there's that much of that happening.
Yeah,
I think that's
I'd like to know. I'd like to hear some numbers, around it. And I think that some of the push for it has been from the real estate industry, which makes me a little bit suspicious. And I think that I think there was a bill like this presented in the state Senate by I'm blanking on his name right now, but he used to be a San Francisco politician that went to Sacramento. Anyway, yeah, I think there's some good people. There's a lot more information out there, I think, that we can find.
So and in our agenda, we did share this. So as you can see, the California Association of Realtors is spending $41 million on it. And then the National Association of Realtors has spent 4.9. And there's like this teeny tiny little wedge, and it's not really clear who is against it. So, I think, to Star's point, Prop 13 is like a behemoth, but it's also a third rail of politics in California. And so I don't know this is the case, but I do wonder whether Yes on 19 is kind of to placate the concerns that Yes on 15 is going to expand to hurt longtime property owners or something like that. I have no, like I said, I have no idea what political deals were made, and I just present this information. And Jody has helpfully put some links in the chat for the Cal Matters video and the Chronicle article.
And
So,
Andrea, the last thing I would say is that in that article in the Chronicle, she did make it sound like the legislature was doing this to placate them somehow. So you hit on what Kathleen Pender hit on as well.
everyone's placating everyone.
That's politics.
Yeah, that's politics. Okay, if there's no one else that have any more information about Prop 19, I'll move on to Prop 20, which is another really, and I would really welcome my criminal defense folks' thoughts on this. So Prop 20 is one of these bonds that, or one of these props that is a little bit wrapped in a shiny paper that makes it look good, but it's actually got a lot going on inside of it. It restricts parole for certain offenses that are currently considered to be nonviolent. What it does, in fact, is requires people to complete their full sentence, and even if they have good reason for to have their minimize their sentence, like good behavior, stuff like that, it reclassifies certain things from misdemeanors to felonies. And it guts rehabilitation services and mental health services in the California prison system. It means that nonviolent offenders have limited access to the parole program, and it is championed by like crime victims groups, but actually lots of legitimate crime victims groups think this is not a good, that it's over criminalizing certain things, which the voters have previously said they did not want to be treated so seriously. So for example, it partially repeals Props 47 and 57, which eliminated 3 strikes rules and a lot of the other work that's been done to start to minimize the prison system and the reliance on the prison system. So that's what I understand a yes vote would do. So I don't know, Liz, do you have any thoughts on this? Oh yeah.
Oh yes, I do. Yeah, so I'm actually, when this got placed when this got placed on the ballot, it's one of those frustrating things about our proposition system that a special, that there's been both legislative and popular amendments moving the criminal justice system in one direction, and that this kind of is an effort to harken back to those tough on crime days and undo some work that has been done in the last few years to change our penal system. And so what I have not yet seen or heard articulated from anybody who's on the yes side is why this is necessary. Like I haven't heard it yet. So Prop 47 passed a few years ago, drastically changed or really shifted how we incarcerate people, how we classify crimes. And there was some fear mongering at that time that would create a wave of crime, that this would just suddenly change the way we all live. And it just hasn't come to fruition, partly because what we had been doing for so long of incarcerating low-level crimes, people who committed low-level crimes for such long periods of time, that was so destructive and actually didn't have much of an effect on crime or crime rates at all, just had an effect on incarceration rates. And we've also shifted funds to assist people, for more mental health services, to have more reentry services in the community, all things that, again, disproportionately, or a yes vote for this bill would disproportionately affect people and communities of color in this state. There's no question about it that that's who would pay the pain and who would pay the price. So so really I'm mystified, unless the people who are supporting this are seeing something in this state that I'm not. It makes no sense. The idea that you would take away the right, we have an overcrowded prison system. Our governor is currently trying to control the budget of our massive incarceration system as it already exists. It's very expensive, and we keep a lot of people in jail for very long periods of time. So that the idea that this would somehow take away the ability of the authorities who run the prisons to prevent people from getting parole, prevent supervision services, it makes no sense to me. I don't get it, other than that it's just some people wanting to be really punitive. And so anyway, I urge everybody to vote a very strong no, and tell all your friends and all your family members to vote no as well. That's my feeling.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So some of the pro people are like, there's not very many of them, but there's like, if you read the ballot guide, it's like, I don't know if this is the right parent because I'm not looking at that ballot guide, but like Polly Klaus's father claims that, like, young children who get kidnapped and raped and killed will somehow be walking free among us. That's sort of the approach that they take, is to make sensational claims that are not really founded in the law. With respect to the funding, someone asked in the chat, Wendy asked in the chat, by requiring people to complete their full sentence and not giving them access to rehab and mental health services, they're not going to make those available to people that would have to do their full sentence, because there's no incentive. People use those systems to help people reduce their sentence by completing those processes. People can reduce their sentence. Those won't be available to them anymore. So they will be defunding rehabilitation services and mental health services in the prisons. So that's the funding argument.
Wouldn't it be more expensive to have people spend more time in jail?
Yeah.
Who's funding this proposition?
Let's check. Let me see. The Peace Officers Association of the Correctional Police Officers Association, police associations are 4 yes on 20. The Chan Zuckerberg Foundation is no, and Patricia Quillen, I don't know who that is, and then individual donors. So it's mostly looks like it's
Police and prison guards.
Prison guards and police officers.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. 21. Proposition 21 expands local government's authorities to enact rent control on residential properties that are older than 15 years. Local limits on rate increases may differ from the statewide limit. So this would just allow, it's not itself rent control, it changes the law around letting local municipalities adopt rent control measures. I am not really familiar. My inclination tends to be towards allowing those state and local governments to make those decisions. I mean, not state governments, but like local governments to make those decisions. But I don't know if there's anyone who has more information about it. That would be helpful.
So my understanding is that one of the things that this does is it semi-repeals part of the Costa-Hawkins Act, which was passed in 1995 and prohibited any building built from 1995 on from being subject to rent control. And it also tied municipalities' hands from imposing rent control if they didn't already have it at that time. So, and it did a bunch of other stuff. But my understanding is that what this does is it changes the 1995 onward prohibition to be one that looks back 15 years or looks forward 15 years from the time that a property was built. So it can be exempt from rent control for 15 years, and that's a rolling thing, so that after 15 years, it becomes subject to rent control. The argument in Costa-Hawkins was that who's going to want to build things at market rate if you're subject to rent control? You know, it's not going to make financial sense for developers. So that's why they imposed, that was the purported reason for imposing that. And so this addresses it with the 15-year aspect. And I think that's probably, that's a pretty key thing in this proposition. And I support that. But I'm pro rent control.
It does have one feature that to me is I feel a little uncomfortable with, which is I'm pretty sure it allows vacancy control, which is banned by Costa-Hawkins. Vacancy control is if you move out, if all the tenants have moved out, can the rent be reset, or is it restricted to whatever the previous tenants had? They had that in Berkeley before this, and that's a pretty strong measure.
Are you sure? So this restricts you from being able to reset to market rate when a unit opens up?
This would allow you, so Costa-Hawkins does not allow that type of, you can't have vacancy control. This would allow a city to have it if they so choose.
But I mean, that would be basically up to, you know, local control. You could vote for city council members who do or don't vote for that, depending on what you want. I'd rather leave that in the hands of local municipalities personally. And if you don't like it, don't vote for somebody who would vote for that.
So there was a question about who's funding. The yes on 21 is the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which is a very, I don't know what their background is. The California Business Roundtable and other landlord groups, property trusts are against no on 21. So that's who's funding yes and no.
The AIDS fund, they pushed this 2 years ago. There was another rent control thing and it failed. And so they are back with this one is more moderate than the one 2 years ago.
Yeah.
The one 2 years ago was to actually repeal Costa-Hawkins altogether. So that wouldn't have had this 15-year rolling thing. And I don't know about the vacancy decontrol part.
All right. Thank you. Prop 22. Whew. This is a proposition which is being purchased by Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash. I have a bias on this one as a labor lawyer. It would exempt. So the background is that the state legislature passed AB 5 that said basically gig workers are not exempt from labor law. We're going to still look at whether they're actually independent contractors or whether they should be classified as employees. And there was a lot of wrangling about that. There's been a lot of professions which feel like it was too narrowly drawn and kicks people out who should be allowed to be independent contractors, like freelance journalists. But this is not about that. This is about gig workers who drive for app-based transportation and delivery companies. So Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and similar app-based transportation and delivery companies would be exempt from treating their drivers as employees and from they don't have to provide any employee benefits. They're not subject to labor law. They would be automatically classified as independent contractors. They put some sweeteners in it, like promising to do a couple of things, but this would require a 7/8 majority to repeal and prevents workers from ever organizing in a union, which I'm not sure how that's not preempted by federal law, but that is in there for now. They have spent $185 million on this campaign, the yes on 22, $185 million to get people to allow them to not pay their employees as employees. There's been a lot of very heartfelt, I've gotten some voicemail messages and text messages, and there's commercials that are like, I'm a single mother and I work around my children's schedule by being a delivery driver. And those are probably true testimonials for a lot of people. I know that a lot of our teachers, unfortunately, have gig economy jobs on the side, but this isn't, to my mind, and I am obviously advocating here, this does not protect folks. They don't get labor protections. They don't have the right to organize. And this is such a supermajority law that, as someone pointed out in the comments, that's a big red flag. Like, this is something that absolutely the legislature should be able to tackle and manage. Yes, people say it's going to drive up your costs, maybe prohibitively, to use Lyft and delivery based apps or an Uber, that no one wants to go back to paying the rates that they did under the old system of getting a cab. I don't know whether that's founded in anything other than their presentation of it. So that's my somewhat biased spin on 22, and I welcome anyone who has a competing view to drop into the, unmute and advocate.
I just have a question. Is there some restriction on people being able to like have more flexible schedules if you're an employee?
No.
So why are they saying I'm a single mom? Because I've gotten a million of these. I'm a single mom. I'm not gonna be able to do this without Prop 22. I'm like, well, why not? Why, I have employees, they work all kinds of weird schedules.
Right. There's no reason that I know of that they cannot continue under the current model. Now I will say this: it's not cost free to have an employee, right? Like there's like a cost built in to having an employee, usually in their benefit load, also in their training and onboarding. Like there's a real cost to having an employee on your books. You have it changes their exposure, changes their liability. It opens a whole new avenue of wondering about insurability and all kinds of stuff, workers' comp, everything that may, cause them to minimize the number of drivers they have. They may say someone who only drives 5 hours a week isn't worth carrying on our books because it's not worth it to us. To my mind, the best way to work this out is is have the legislature work it out, or to have the employees represented by a union or other organization which speaks for them and negotiates the terms and conditions of their employment, not to have a set of corporations buying legislation at a proposition level.
Well, my understanding was that AB 5, right, which went into effect in January, has some very clear boundaries around what is an independent contractor versus an employee. And it's all around how many hours you work. It's not necessarily the flexibility. So if you work more than 20 hours a week, then you are considered an employee and you are required to pay all of those benefits. So I think what they are trying to basically do is not pay the benefits that are associated with part-time work. So that's what these companies, it costs a lot of money, but these people need help. So personally, I'm an independent contractor. There's a lot of rules around AB 5. It's very difficult. I can't even imagine what they are dealing with and as sort of like hourly almost employees.
I think one of the interesting factors about it is that Prop 22 it counts the hours that if you are waiting in your car and not driving, that would not count as work. Only the only hours that count as work is when you're driving. And I think the trade-off there is that an employer is not they cannot have somebody waiting around and not driving. Like on a quiet night, they might say, you can't drive because we don't have enough business. Whereas somebody might say like, I don't, I really want to work. I'm okay. I'll wait in my car until a call comes in. With this kind of thing, I think I think the points people have made have been good, but there's always a trade-off between better jobs for like a good amount of people, but that will probably exclude some people who won't be able to get any job because you won't be able to get into a marginal position.
I mean, there's a lot of, I think that's right. I mean, there's a lot of the arguments that are made by these companies, which are very similar to arguments that were made by employers at the turn of the 19th century to the 20th century around piecework. Like you'll lose flexibility if, you know, you can't just do people's laundry by piecework. Or, I mean, there's a lot of old arguments that are bubbled forth, and they have been solved before by, not by companies buying legislation, but by the legislature and union organizing and collective bargaining. So does anyone else want to speak on this one? All right, now I'm going to flip my lid here and go to Prop 23, which establishes state requirements for kidney dialysis clinics and requires an on-site medical center. And you're like, you feel like you've heard this one before because we did dialysis centers a couple of years ago and it lost. Yeah. So this has been put on the ballot by SEIU, who is in a battle to the death for organizing in dialysis clinics. And whereas I sounded like I was all in favor of collective bargaining in the last measure, I also don't think unions should be able to buy legislation, and I don't think they should use the proposition system to bully, to have a bully pulpit. I think that the appropriate place for this is the legislature and in probably, you know, Department of Healthcare, you know, Health and Human Services, wherever this should live, that's the appropriate place for it. I also think that I have a concern about this requirement about requiring on-site medical. The dialysis centers say that this could put them out of business because there are not doctors who are willing to hang out in dialysis centers. This is something that nurses and can manage. And similar to the Louisiana bill that requires that abortion providers have medical hospital privileges, admitting privileges, it doesn't increase medical access. It actually eliminates medical access for people who need it, who are on dialysis. So while I do think it's a good idea that our dialysis centers be like clean and regulated and, you know, well serve the population that needs it in a healthy, clean way, I don't think that this does that. I think that it will result in the closure of dialysis centers and is not actually focused on the real outcome, but is more of a you know, a public relations battle. So people are welcome to chime in about it. Happy to hear it. No one wants to demand a doctor.
I think this is one of those classic propositions that end up on our ballot where I can't even understand why the voters of California are being asked to make this decision. Like there's a legislature, a health agency, all kinds of people. It just seems, anyway.
That was a really
I get frustrated when I see these kind of ballots because I don't know anything about it. I can't educate myself well enough to understand it. And I know what Star was saying before about how we have to sort of try, but I just come away saying, you know, why? And didn't we already vote on this? And yeah.
Well, I think that was a good explanation, Andrea, and I appreciate it. And now I think I am actually going to vote on this proposition, which I wasn't going to before.
Well, I'm glad that's helpful. Now, the next one I truly don't know much about, or I shouldn't say this. I don't know where to come out on it. This amends consumer privacy laws, and it permits consumers to prevent businesses from sharing personal information, allows them to correct inaccurate personal information, and limits business use of sensitive personal information, and creates a California Privacy Protection Agency. All of those things sound really good, and I think most of us are in favor of privacy. The no people say that this actually is a lighter set of protections than the legislature has already passed, and that it takes longer to implement this than the existing California law, and that this was written by big tech with input from them about what was permissible to them. So I truly welcome folks' thoughts on this. If you have any insider information or are more knowledgeable, I do welcome it. Because I just don't, I mean, I know how I voted on it, but I don't really feel so strongly about it to put my thumb on the scale about it. Let's take a quick look at who funded it and see if that helps clarify.
So the only, I can chime in here. The only information I've had about this so far comes from a friend who works for the Attorney General's office, actually, who's on the consumer enforcement side, who's opposed to it. What he writes is that Prop 24, while well-intentioned, is a 52-page consumer privacy initiative sponsored by real estate magnate Alistair McTaggart, which sounds like a character out of a James Bond movie. And it's riddled with loopholes and requires consumers to opt in as opposed to opting out. The California legislature needs to pass a good law drafted by privacy experts rather than playing the proposition game. Fortunately, the Electronic Frontiers Foundation and the ACLU have developed legislation which has been introduced in Sacramento. We should support that effort. And there's a link to that information that I can try to share, but will probably fail. But anyway, so that's what I know about it, if that's helpful to anybody.
That's really helpful. I would just note, looking at this, it's written so tiny. It does appear that the only spending on this proposition has been by Alistair McTaggart. FBI.
Bond villain.
McTaggart, and then that guy with the AIDS Foundation in Hollywood. The two of them, they're like, they're repeat customers. They keep coming to us with these expensive things. My husband was pointing out, I'm not sure if this is the one where one of the supporters in the ballot is someone whose last name is Cabraser, and there's that firm that's always underwriting the news on KQED, Leaf, Cabraser, Hyman, and Bernstein. And he was like, I bet it's that firm, I bet there's some kind of legal angle.
I don't know. They do plaintiff side stuff. Big.
Okay, well, you would know better than I would, Andrea. I'm just sharing with you our internal, conspiracy theory here.
It's interesting. Elizabeth Cabraser's Leaf, Cabraser, Hyman and Bernstein is a big plaintiff side law firm that does mass class action stuff. So
maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. It would be
Andrew,
interesting.
can I just report here?
Yeah.
I've gone back and forth so often on this one. I voted yesterday, and I actually don't remember which way I voted on this, but I did get to see a really great debate at the Wellstone Democratic Club over this issue, and it was Doraka Larimore Hall, who's the vice chair of the California Democratic Party, in favor, and then this local activist against. And I'd heard a lot of the against arguments, but Doraka was very convincing in the for argument, saying that, his argument was that this would create privacy protections and that there's the potential for the legislature to make it stronger, but not to make it weaker. But then, because I always go back to that question of, well, why can't the legislature do this? Like, why are we voting on this as a proposition? So anyway, it was one of those few times where there was a good argument back and forth, and both people were like civil and polite to each other and also had really good arguments. So I honestly cannot remember which way I voted.
Liz, do you want to say something? You're on mute. Okay.
No, that sounds about right.
Well, I know Doraka and I went to college together, and I used to go see a ska band in the basement of my friend's.
That is a great.
He's a smart guy. I think that I ultimately voted no, but I think that it is very difficult. It is a tough question whether this is the right set of measures or not. So I do encourage folks, we did put voter guides in the agenda, so encourage you to look at those links and do other independent research. Does anyone else have anything on 24? All right, I will go on to 25. This is would replace the money bail system. And I want to point to the comments. There've been a couple of clarifying points about this and about Prop 23 that I do encourage you to take a look at, more information than I provided. So please definitely check that out. On 25, this replaces the money bail system with a system, an algorithm that's based on public safety and flight risk. So instead of charge incarceration, people would not automatically have money bail. There would be assessed on their flight risk and whether they pose a risk of harm to the general public. This is almost entirely funded by by the bail bond industry. Money bail is considered to be a hugely inequitable process that keeps people incarcerated much longer than they need to be, often resulting in a loss of their job, loss of their car. Like it's an inequitable system, the current money bail system. And this replacement, while some people don't like an algorithm, does prevent, overly punitive judges. It does prevent people who might be a flight risk or a safety issue, like a violent offender, from being released. So that is what I know about it. Someone in the chat notes that bail is a tax on the poor. I think that's, a lot of people see that as an accurate characterization of it. Like I said, some people oppose an algorithm, and there's some algorithms that don't work well, like our federal sentencing guidelines, and some that do, like Disomaster, which is the way that the family law court figures out how child custody and support will be calculated. I think that's considered to be a more fair approach than letting individual judges order it. So, does anyone have any additional thoughts on Prop 25?
Isn't this a referendum, meaning that it's basically approving something that was already passed? And if you vote no on it, you're voting to repeal something that is in existence right now?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
This is the bail bond industry trying to repeal something that either we or the legislature already passed.
Wait, say that.
Yeah.
Say that again. What is
so?
Is it
so
a
there
yes
was
or a no then?
I think we want to vote yes.
So if you
Okay.
So I can sort of chime in here a little bit. So there was a law that was passed, SB 10, last year, signed by the governor. It got put on hold because there was enough signatures to put this on the ballot. SB 10 repeals cash bail, or already abolishes cash bail, and was an attempt to implement a new system of determining whether people who are what to do, whether you can incarcerate people pre-conviction, right? So that's who bail impacts, obviously. I think everybody probably knows that. So SB 10 was already passed, already signed by the governor, and then this kind of happened. And yes, the bill was, this proposition is 100% funded by the bail bonds industry, which is,
Wait, I'm sorry. Does that make it a no then?
No, so a referendum is something that anybody can do. Like if your city council or your state legislature pass a law, then citizens can get together and get enough signature to put what's called a referendum on the ballot. And that referendum, if you vote yes on it, you're affirming the law that was passed. And if you vote no on it, you're repealing the law that was passed. So the bail bond industry did this referendum to try and repeal SB 10. Okay. And what SB 10 did was basically get rid of cash bail because it's inequitable. Yeah. So if you vote yes on this, you will vote yes on repealing, on getting rid of cash bail.
Right. But I think that the counter argument is also that the algorithm, it might not be fair, that algorithms can also be racially biased, for example, and that even if you're against the bail system, this might not be the right replacement. And I don't know how to evaluate that algorithm. I heard what Andrew was saying, like some are good and work and some aren't. I don't know how to evaluate this one.
Well, I guess so I'll just read the text of this to kind of to reinforce what Star said. A yes vote approves and a no vote rejects the law replacing money bail with a system based on public safety and flight risk.
So
I don't know who creates the algorithm. Algorithms can be changed. So that's the system we theoretically have in place now. And yet we'll continue to have if yes passes. Liz?
So I will say, I can chime in here, and I'm so in the criminal justice community, the criminal defense community, and the criminal justice reform community, there is actually some kind of a split here. So there are some folks who, on my side of the fence, that are actually who are going to vote no, and part of that is because I think what you just pointed out, I'm not sure who it was, highlighting sort of this issue that the algorithm, it's not that the algorithm is inequitable, it's that some people who would otherwise maybe be able to post bail, so at a low amount, are probably not going to be able to and are going to stay in custody, particularly when you initially get arrested and before you get to court, right? So a lot of times right now, if you get brought into jail, you can post bail that night and get out. This would kind of eliminate that process, right? So you would have to wait until you get in front of a magistrate 2 or 3 days later. And that can have a big impact for a lot of people, particularly poor people. And so some of my clients will be affected by this in a way that is going to be negative. On the whole, though, I've been doing the work that I do for 25 years, and the inequities built into the bail bond system are so profound. They're so racist. It is one of the most, if you pardon my language, fucked up things that happens in our criminal justice system, where we keep people in jail before they've been convicted of anything because they are poor. That's all. That is it. If you can post the money, you can get out. It doesn't have anything to do with public safety. It doesn't have anything to do with how dangerous you are, how bad your crime was. Nothing. It's just, are you rich enough to get out? If you are, go ahead. Everybody knows that's messed up. So I feel, so despite what I think are going to be genuine issues for people of color and poor people who are going to have to stay in jail longer because there isn't even the option to post bail, even a small amount, I think that the overall benefit of eliminating the system, which is regressive and racist and penalizes poor people across the board, it far outweighs that damage. So I also think that some of the people in my community who oppose it, SB 10, when it was created, or when it was the legislature that was hashed out, not everybody got everything that they wanted. So some of the folks who are urging a no vote on this are on that spectrum of folks who are like, hey, we didn't get the system that's in place, that's being suggested by SB 10 is not exactly what we want, or is not perfect. I kind of agree with them on some of the things that they wanted, so I get that. But overall, I think that the bail system has got to go. That's kind of what I think this piece of legislation is about. So,
do you think that if people voted no on this, if this loses, what chance do you think there is for your colleagues or people in your profession who are opposed to this because of the algorithm aspect? Do you think that there's a better chance of getting what they want if we vote no on this? Or do you think there's a better chance of amending AB 10 if this passes?
That's definitely, I think, part of it is that if we go back to the old system, I mean, this is kind of what the bail bonds industry is counting on. If we go back to the old system, the momentum for change, the effort that went into creating the reform, the SB 10 will have kind of lost its, will it be set back in a way that we will kind of go back to the way it was. And that will be, I think it'll be less likely to get overall large scale reform. And that's, one of the other options here is to sort of tweak this so that you could say, okay, you could have bail, but you could only have bail that you can actually afford. So if somebody looked at my bank account and said, okay, you could afford $5,000 bail, or somebody who's poorer than me, hey, you can afford $100 bail, put it up. That would be a great system, but that's not actually what's in place. It's a much more, it's basically an algorithm that creates the amount of bail, what bail gets set for. What bail gets set at is a pretty arbitrary number. So yeah, so I think that part of the problem with sort of throwing us back to 3 years ago when this reform movement started will not aid in the actual process of reform. So
I want to thank you. That's super helpful.
Andrea,
Yeah,
this Jennifer, I just want to share really quick what I know as well.
go ahead.
And that, and I work for probation. And so with SB 10, what happened is instead of people just being released if they could afford bail, they get an assessment. So a probation officer goes in and interviews them prior to their court date, which didn't happen before. It was only based on if they could afford to pay for it. So now an assessment is done and it's based on what level they assess at, whether they can be released, and not just based on whether they can afford to.
That's helpful. Thank you. So it's already being implemented?
Yep. So yes, SB 10 is already implemented. And this, as the lady that mentioned, I didn't catch her name, but I agree with what she said, that it's important that we vote yes on 25, right? That it would keep the bail reform. It would keep the bail. We want bail reform because currently with bail, it's racist, it's unequitable, and people who can't afford it are kept in jail, essentially.
Thanks, Jennifer. That's really helpful. Okay, the last item I'm going to talk about is S1, which is the Oakland City Charter Amendment. This, in 2016, the City of Oakland passed, the people of the City of Oakland passed Measure LL, which created a civilian oversight body called the Oakland Police Commission. I was on the police commission when it was first seated in 2017. I was an alternate commissioner, and I was on the commission for about 1.5 years. And when the city council so it created the commission, and the enabling legislation that went to the city council in late 2017 created an inspector general position and independent legal counsel for the commission, because the city attorney's office provides legal counsel to both the police department and the police commission, and it was, in the view of the commissioners, creating a conflict of interest. The city attorney then told the city council, you guys can't create an inspector general and give them independent counsel. Everything has to be through the city administrator's office. And remember, we had for a while, the city administrator was the acting police chief, anyway, S1 amends the city charter and adds an Office of Inspector General to review and report on the police department and the community police review agencies' practices about police misconduct, and allows the police commission to hire and remove the inspector general, and changes the powers and duties of the commission and the CPRA to hire independent counsel that's independent of the city attorney's office. Measure LL passed with 87% of the vote. I mean, 87% of Oaklanders were in favor of civilian oversight. And this gives them additional strength to audit the police department and get independent counsel on police misconduct issues. So, does anyone have any questions about it? Just to clarify, the police commission is not the police department. And so I will say that when we had a lot of police misconduct, a lot of police brutality issues this summer and the marches, and the police commission is the civilian oversight body that would say, for example, you guys can't use flash grenades and you can't use chemical, detonators to disperse a crowd. They are currently working on a carotid choke policy to eliminate carotid restraints, like the type that killed Eric Garner. So that's the kind of stuff that they work on, and the police review agency actually reviews individual complaints of police misconduct and can, independent of the police department, refer for discipline. And if there's a dispute between the police department and the CPRA, the police commission is the body that makes the decision about whether to move the discipline forward or not. All right, so I can talk about that for a long time. So if anyone doesn't have, if you have any other questions, I like I've said, my husband says, Andrea doesn't need to see a movie to have an opinion about it. So if there's anything else you want to stick around and talk about, I'll hang out for a minute. Otherwise, I go vote, and make sure you track your ballot and get it in and share
No
what
one is opposing S1, right?
Huh?
No one is opposing S1, is that correct?
No, not even the Police Officers Association is opposing S1. There was a lot of foot dragging on it when it was going up through the city council, but ultimately, you know, that was in the midst of the police, the reaction to the way the police were treating folks who were marching and stuff like that. So once it finally got out of city council, it didn't really have anyone who was willing to slow walk it or oppose it, as far as I know. So, all right, you guys, I hope this has been helpful and informative, and it's been super fun. I learned a lot. So you are welcome to ending the meeting. Make sure you download the voter guide so you can mark it off and take it with you. And perfect. And check out the voter guides. And it's great seeing so many people show up for something that wasn't actually, they didn't have to show up for. So I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Andrea. It was great presentation.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Deborah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. That was awesome.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for everybody who threw stuff in the chat. That was super helpful.
Mhm.
Awesome. Good job, guys. Thank you.
Yay. Thanks,
Thank
Andrea.
All your
Thanks,
input.
June. This
So
was
helpful.
great.
So helpful. Thank you.
Really
June.
good. Worked good.
Good.
All right.
Take
Bye,
care.
all.
Bye.